Welcome to VUC 2019, Visions Under Construction. And that's funny. And we're here live again with some of the regulars. I want to tell you about Comedy World, of course, May 6th to 8th in Berlin. Does that say 2049 or 2019? I can't read it very well with the film strip, but I think it's right. The ticker tape was wrong. So many things to change, and so many various dates to keep up with. I'm going to guess that ComCon is before ClueCon. Let's see if I'm right. ComCon is the 7th to 11th of July. Hey, Dan Jenkins, my birthday's in there somewhere. Hint, hint. ClueCon, August 5th to 8th in Chicago. And this other thing, which is really a serious IIT. Corrado, have you heard of these people? IIT, it's pretty serious stuff. They're
that's Ted Hack and stuff.
Well, Ted Hack, but I mean the IIT has been doing this for a while, and they're out of, I think, the University of Chicago or something like that.
Yeah.
Official stuff.
Illinois Institute of Technology.
Thank you. That's good, because I really didn't know what it was. Anyway.
But it says that on the picture.
Yeah, but who can read? First of all, backwards to me. Second of all.
Okay.
Anyway, lots of, the title of this episode is What a Week! Exclamation point. Because I had no idea what we were going to talk about. So I figured that's a good one. What a week. And we had what a week. There's been one of the things, we have quite a few topics, but the first one I want to talk about with Jay involves the blockchain, and this was announced at least a year ago by a guy named Mark Zuckerberg, Hamburgers. I'm not sure if anybody's heard of him, but he apparently wants to put the Facebook sign-in on what they call the blockchain. And Jay, the question I asked you just before was, why did some people call it the blockchain? There isn't just one, is there?
Anyone can create a blockchain. It's sort of like creating your own neighborhood newsletter. The question is how many people are going to use it, how many people are going to trust it, and so forth. So there are many, many blockchains, and but it was kind of put into the category like the internet, the blockchain, but it's actually many, many different blockchains. And although a lot of people want, or at least thought there would be just one blockchain, at this point there are many.
But if it was just one blockchain, it would be horribly inefficient, like Bitcoin, right?
Well, not necessarily. It depends. But I think what Mark Zuckerberg's talking about, and I think the solution to the single sign-on and all that sort of thing that he's talking about would involve a pretty ubiquitous blockchain, basically. So for it to really work the way he's talking about it, other people have talked about it. I mean, this is a topic that I'm pretty sure has been talked about over the years on the VUC, is how do we do a single sign-on? How do we get away from this crazy, every time we want to use some new service or new item on the internet, we got to set up a new account, new password, blah, 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 completely insecure, completely inefficient from a human usability standpoint. So
you're supposed to use new passwords on every site?
I do, Randy.
Anyway, before we move further, and Jay, I want you to take a deep dive into this stuff. But before we move forward, currently, most of these sites, because you can log in, and we've talked about this between us. You can log in with Facebook. Using your Facebook ID, you can log into other sites. You can also use Google's ID. There used to be a thing called OpenID. I don't even know if that's still a thing, but a lot of people were doing it. And also, you can use Twitter, among other things. So I was wondering, and we have Mr. James Bodie, surprise guest, is with us. Hello, James.
Sorry.
I was wondering, who knows what all this stuff is? I think Twitter's based on OAuth. Would I be right to say something like that? And I've actually programmed my own stuff from a library to talk to Twitter and have cron jobs and things going. And that is an OAuth library. Who knows about this? Hank, you might know more about this stuff than most of us. How do
OAuth
things work?
OAuth is a pretty ubiquitous protocol for doing the authentication part. And that's what's handling, even when you look at OpenID actually is based off of OAuth as well. The thing that OAuth doesn't give you are things like permissions. So there's a question of, is this person, the identity, is this person who they say they are, and that sort of thing. But once you get into the system, you have well, what can that person do? And OAuth is that's beyond OAuth. That's where the OpenID stuff picks up. So the nice thing is, all of these people, the Googles, the Facebooks, the Twitters, et cetera, of the world, they've been building these single sign-on systems on top of the different.
Now joining in wideband.
Oops.
Of OAuth protocol. So they're somewhat interchangeable. And then it's a question of there's an entire there's a couple of different ways of protocols, for lack of a better expression, that you use for deciding how you're going to do the authentication. But they're all based on each other. The big question is do you trust the authority that's basically saying that is reaching out to say this person is who they say they are, and that sort of thing? Because if they aren't able to secure their infrastructure, then you basically have a compromised system. Obviously, Google and Facebook are able to do that. The question is do they accidentally leave backdoors open, or are there implementation errors that they are not aware of that allow malicious actors to trawl the system for data?
Exactly.
Hank, if I could ask Hank a question.
Sure.
Hank, there's also another dimension to the problem with these attestation constructs, I'll call them, in that they're kind of self-referential, in that you're trusting that whoever has Facebook or Google or Twitter has authenticated the identity is kind of based upon somebody creating an account and saying, hey, this is who I say I am. So there becomes this sort of circular logic of, okay, I've created an account on Facebook. My name is, Jay Phoenix or whatever. I get enough connections on the social media so it looks like I'm legitimate, but there's really no way to truly authenticate I am who I say I am. Is that correct?
That's a whole nother dimension to the problem, and that isn't even a theoretical problem. If you're on I personally have I kind of have my guard up when I see stuff like that. So I'll see something like just a few weeks ago, someone that I work with who I thought I was connected to on LinkedIn, I got another connection request from the same name, and I'm like, well, that's odd. Why am I not connected? Is it a new account and all that? So you start investigating. Don't automatically connect, because once you connect, that opens up a lot of implied veracity. So it turned out it was the guy's son who interned with me, and he set up the account. And I didn't notice that it had the third instead of junior on it, so it was a legitimate thing. But it's happened on Facebook where I see someone and I'm like, I think I might have met that person before. And on Facebook, I try to be, if I haven't met you in real life, we're generally not connecting. This is for me. This is for people I know. Like, I think I might have met them at a party once. And I say, oh, they know these three people that I know. So I send them messages like, hey, who is this person? Did I meet them at this party? And they're like, I have no idea who you're talking about. And then you go through a little bit of investigation, and it's like, this was a completely fabricated account. And so you have to be on guard to that. The other thing that you have to be on guard with is I don't know if we want to get into how the protocols work, but basically there's a handshaking that's going on between the application that's basically saying, hey, I want to access this service. Can the OAuth server tell me that this person's allowed, it's the right person, I'm allowed to do certain things, etc. They're given an access token back. If they're not being careful about how they're managing the access token, or if they're not being careful on the servers that are doing the handshaking, it's very easy to compromise the system. And the servers are basically saying, if you have an access token, I assume, and I think it's valid, I'm assuming you have it for valid reasons. That isn't necessarily a good assumption, because if the person is compromising it. So for example, there was a really good speech at FOSDEM on how data is leaking a lot around the internet, with things are being passed around in the query parameter strings and they're not being properly filtered. And so now that's being passed around in unencrypted traffic, and there's a lot of data. I'll have to find the presentation. Really interesting. A lot of data is being leaked, and it's a lot of like account data, location data, those sorts of things, and then access tokens. And so if someone takes your access token and then they put it into their service, they actually will have all of the accreditation or all the access privileges that the legitimate app did, because they leaked information. So, I think there's a somewhat of a false sense of security around, going back to what you're saying in this, which is, it's all we have to do with these 3 handshake things, and magically everything's secure and everything's fine. Well, unfortunately, you can't abdicate your security responsibility as a developer or as a user to that regard. And I'm not even sure if there's a technological way for us to do that, especially on the figuring out who is legitimately who they say they are. But again, that's a separate conversation.
Well, and just to kind of expand the issue, the same flaw, let's say, in OAuth and so forth, that extends to certificate authorities, where you've got like 1,000 different certificate authorities or whatever. All it takes is for one of them to become compromised, and basically you've got the whole run of the system, right?
Yeah, that is a very similar problem. There was an incident about 10 years ago where there was a certificate authority in, it was in the standard registrars in Chrome and Mozilla, but it was like whatever it was in like Zimbabwe or something like that. And it was completely unsecure. So then I was like, well, I decided to manually go in and say, I'm only going to accept certificate authorities from these specific things, which are known to be secure. So Germany, United States, Japan, I was doing it geographically based. I basically broke the internet for myself. Unfortunately, again, that's even assuming you're paying that close of attention. How many times are people presented with this certificate, this isn't a legitimate certificate because it expired, let's say, and say, oh yeah, go ahead, just take it anyway. It's like, well, if you're not inspecting it, it's like there's a lot of implied security and people just are not being security aware. And that's even that's even assuming that they're making sure they have an HTTPS connection before they actually start doing some serious stuff with a website as well. So, yeah, there is a definite until something large happens. Everyone's a little bit too probably slack with those sorts of things.
Yeah.
Well, and just
sorry,
if I could make yet another point that's relevant to the VUC, in the IETF, there's something called STIR, which is trying to boost or foster identity around telephone numbering. And I haven't followed it closely in some time, but I'm pretty sure it's based upon a similar model to certificate authorities, where you've got this basically trusted club that you're hoping everybody's, trustworthy and not compromised. So, I think it's a big problem. And I'm sorry to interrupt you, Corrado.
Yeah, I have a story, and Corrado has a story. So let Corrado go first, and I'll tell you what happened to me today.
Okay.
Go ahead, Corrado.
Well, I have more than one thing now that have cropped up relative to secure numbers. I just saw on Twitter one of my connections tweeting to EE that is passing as DDI, as CLIs, numbers that cannot be passed, numbers that in the local area start with 1. So that's impossible. They're not even filtering and checking that the numbers they are sending out and the numbers that are being used are legitimate. So
Wait,
that
how is that being done? Since we're all telco people here.
simply spoofing your ID on a voice over IP call. You spoof your caller ID. If your trunk is not filtering, is not controlling, you can set whatever caller ID you want. And
But don't most trunks filter these days? I mean, see, in the Wild West of when Asterisk first started out, you could send anything, but now a lot of the services don't allow.
There are a number of well-known cheap providers that really don't care.
Okay.
And you don't have to buy it from a provider in a reputable country. Let me say.
Oh.
And that's the point. There's another thing. As we were discussing shortly, I've now started listening to podcasts. And just yesterday, I decided to go with our, let's say, colleague. Is probably a bit too much. Richard Gibson podcast. And he was talking about a number of things, including a certificate authority that has been blocked by the by ICANN because it wasn't decent enough. They wanted to be a root authority, and again, a bit of surveillance by ICANN has saved us from that. Another thing was that Apple is using by default not to accept third-party cookies in Safari. Every other browser does it. And Apple has now strengthened the checks. I'm going off my memory of what I heard. So cross-scripting and cross-domain attacks cannot be done, and the cookies cannot be leaked. They are controlling that the CRC of the cookie is consistent and is not from another site. So they're securing Safari. If only that would render HTML and CSS better, it would be possibly the more secure browser that we have. Another thing that is worth of notice, if I can get my head around it, was a thing that Microsoft did in a DLL that was hidden in the System32 folder in the Windows folder with a whitelist of sites that could run Flash content without user agreement, without user knowledge. There was a list, a very extensive list, because it was a bin file, .bin, encrypted in with SHA-256. But someone took the trouble to decode that, and there were some very, very funny domain names that were whitelisted, including the a hairdresser in Spain. So who knows why that was. That whitelist now has been whittled to just 2 sites. And let me test you. Do you know what these 2 sites are?
Microsoft.com and what else?
No. app.facebook.com and www.facebook.com.
Oh, God.
Really?
They are still if you use Microsoft Edge, if there is Flash content on an app developed on the top of Facebook APIs, that Flash content will start without your knowledge.
And why?
With all the flaws and all the bugs that we know Flash has. Why don't they die?
Why can't we kill Flash? I have a quick anecdote. I'm going to try to resume this into a few sentences.
If you let me.
Oh, you weren't done. Okay, go ahead.
No, I haven't done, but it's very quick. It's as I said, it's funny, and it's if you can see that.
You're not sharing anything yet, but if you're trying to share something, there we go.
It's just a tweet by a gal that is saying, she's trying to print, and the printer is not saying, no, I won't print because I'm missing the yellow ink. Well, it's a black and white document, and the printer says, no. Do you know why printer do not print without yellow? Or for what it worth, is worth, even if it's a black and white document, they need the color cartridges.
Yeah.
Does anybody knows? Nobody. Okay. The many governments around the world
encode the output so you can track documents to printers.
Exactly. Micro dots
Right.
in yellow ink that are practically invisible to the human eye, that are dotted around in a pattern on everything you print.
Wow.
So they can identify the exact printer on day and hour of the document has been printed.
Incredible.
If you use UV lights on a document that has been printed on your printer, possibly not super draft, super quick draft, but in quality, you will see those yellow dots jump at you.
We don't have a color printer here, but can I tell my story now?
Oh,
okay. So here's what happened. The post office in this country, France, wants to be your ID headquarters for all kinds of government and official sites. And, I mean, they're in a good place to do that, and that's fine. And so they're taking over from another board of just such and such government branch. But the point is, anyway, you go fill out a thing, you upload your documents, you need an ID, you need, a bunch of stuff that proves, just like when you have stock or banks, you do all that on the internet. And that's great. It's real modern. It's wonderful. But then they want you to authenticate by meeting with your postman or post person. And so they give you an appointment. And I had that appointment today at 12 noon because that's when they come by. Met the guy. He looked at my ID card, which I had already uploaded to make sure it was the same. He looked at my, he knew he was at the physical address. And he looked at the code that I was sent. Hey, two-factor authentication. They sent me a code. So I gave him the code. He entered all this stuff. We said goodbye. He gave me my mail. About an hour later, I get a thing saying, I'm sorry. We're sorry. We could not proceed with your authentication because of an error in data entry. So I'm going to see him again tomorrow, perhaps a different postman. But the point is, the guy probably made a mistake on his little keyboard, and it didn't work. It didn't correspond.
Sorry, Randy, I was going to ask a question. How does he enter that data? Has he got a mobile phone or something?
Yeah. He has it's a phone or a terminal of some kind. Yeah. So I was thinking while he was doing it, they should photograph the ID because I showed him my ID card. They should photograph the national ID, but he had to, so he probably missed a number or something. And I certainly have done that a million times, but I just think it's funny in the context of our discussion here. We're talking about trust, authentication, ID, and so on. Here's a system that actually comes to your door, looks at your ID, knows they're at a physical address, sees you, talks to you, and gets a code that you received, a sort of a two-factor authentication code, and they still screwed it up somehow. So I don't know. It's weird. Anyway,
that's almost a three-factor authentication.
Yeah, it is three. Actually, it's more than three because anyway, long story. I want to get back to Jay because Jay, I don't think you were done with your explanation. I'm still confused that they say the blockchain because there is only one internet. I know there's darknet maybe, but there is only really the internet. But the blockchain, no. Anyway, what do you think of Zuck's idea, which has been rolling around for like a year anyway? Is this basically a feasible and viable idea, or is he nuts?
Well, I don't think he's nuts, and there are a lot of people that are looking for a decentralized construct. Let's say, you might call it blockchain, and maybe it will be blockchain. But there are a lot of people looking for a decentralized way to create what's called self-sovereign identity. So let's really step back the 100,000 foot level. And, up until this point, we've pretty much relied upon centralized identity trusted sources like governments and, companies and so forth. The hope is that we can create this peer-to-peer identity construct where we actually control our identities. And I think that's kind of what he's really talking about. The term blockchain gets thrown in, but there are a lot of people looking at this, and how that all comes about is a much harder problem than it would appear to be on the surface. So does that make sense, Randy?
Oh yeah, totally. I think that there's another factor here, which may be that they're just looking to distract everybody, just like the White House does, from the other horrible things that have happened. And Facebook has experienced a number of, what do we call them, setbacks? No, I don't know. Soiled the reputation. Note in passing that I don't think anyone who actually uses Facebook cares about any of the things that have happened. It's more people like me who don't use it who are thinking, wow, that's crazy. Starting with the Cambridge Analytica and stuff like that. So I don't know. This is bigger than Facebook. Facebook is the biggest iceberg, that's protruding from the ocean. But this is, going to be a problem that's everywhere, really. And
I admit that I didn't follow this when it came out a year ago. Have they been doing updates on it?
No, they're not doing anything. They're looking at it. We're looking at it.
Because I mean, a year ago, if we were at the peak of high expectation before the trough of despair on the hype curve with blockchain. So if you didn't say you were doing blockchain, your shareholders were not very happy with you because blockchain.
Right.
McDonald's had a blockchain, I think.
Right.
AI, and blockchain and ML and as well, right? And this is how you satisfy investors today.
So I don't know if it was just they needed to throw something out there, and I mean, obviously they would be playing with the technology. There are legitimate uses for blockchain. It's just this ubiquitousness of it is way premature to say the least. But as a large organization and having to be an upcoming technology, it would make sense for them to be playing around with it. And then from a marketing and shareholder perspective, it makes sense for them to say that they're working with it. A year ago, especially, I know there's been a lot more skepticism of it in the last 6 months or so, as lots of studies have come out and said basically there's been no. I don't agree with the study says there's absolutely no use cases for blockchain where it makes sense. It doesn't make sense. I think that's an overstatement, but it's also a bit of a correction of the. Again, blockchain for everything when it wasn't necessarily and most probably not appropriate. In terms of are they looking at it like, one of the complaints about blockchain is always the transaction speed, scalability, and the energy usage for the security aspect. Both of those are being driven by the mechanism that they're using from the security model. So the proof of work, proof of storage, those sorts of things. Are they looking at a more private blockchain type of implementation, or are they going back to this brute force thing where we basically melt entire glaciers full of energy every 10 minutes to calculate the next hash?
Let's take a look at what Zuck has to say. So this article is from February 21st, 2019. So that's not too long ago. A couple of days, actually. Zuckerberg eyeing blockchain for Facebook login. The Facebook login, I don't care. Data sharing, when you put data sharing and Facebook in the same sentence,
we've been stung once.
It's like, God, I can think of 1,000 pornographic and obscene ways to show that. But anyway, so this is an article on Forbes. I guess you'd have to go to the URL is very long, but I guess you'd have to go to Forbes and look for this. But data protection is key. Yeah.
It's all the same, right? Login is login, regardless of whether you're a Facebook user logging in to assert who you are, or a Facebook partner logging in to gain access to all those users' data. Authentication is authentication, and so there's no reason why they would have two mechanisms. But blockchain, okay, what does that mean? Incontrovertible proof that I did something, but I don't know. I just don't know.
Well, isn't it the part of it is that it's a publicly accessible and non-modifiable record, right, Jay?
Well, it depends. There are private blockchains, so supposedly private blockchains, which I think is really not blockchain. But you know, there are ways that people are experimenting to create sort of like permissioned elements of even public blockchains. And there's also like what I was experimenting with last weekend using the interplanetary file system. There are ways to encrypt files and then either reference those on the blockchain or something like a distributed hash table, or you know, decentralized ledger technology, so forth. So there's different ways to do this, and everybody's experimenting. But you know, to get back to the Facebook announcements, I think all these companies are looking at blockchain or this decentralization as both a threat and an opportunity. It's very similar to where the telecoms were in the mid 90s when this thing called the internet was coming along. You know, is this going to obviate telcos? Well, no, it didn't. It actually became an opportunity for the telcos. I think blockchain is in a similar situation, this decentralization. And I think the reason that Facebook's really looking at it is they have some big problems, and the decentralization, be it blockchain or something else, might be a way for them to solve some of the issues, just like the telcos solve some of the issues with their, you know, voice transmission and so forth. Does that make sense?
Well, let me ask Hank something, because I think he knows a little more about this than most of us. Hank, you're familiar with Diaspora, I know, and Diaspora is a bunch of pods federated and so on. And when I log into my local pod, I have a couple, but when I log into one, that information presumably is stored in, you know, so I got a username and a password. Actually, it's an email, I think, is the username, password, and it's just stored in a one of two or however many databases they actually use behind it. And it's just like a million other sites, right?
Yes, that's correct. It's using the standard authentication system and storing it in whatever database engine the pod admin has decided to set up.
And then presumably a cookie allows you not to have to enter your password every time you look at a page. So there's probably a cookie looking at that, right? For the session.
Yeah, I mean, it's standard. You're right. It's standard session management. This is the way the site works. When it's not with the API, they actually have OAuth providers as well that are talking to the same system. So it can do the OAuth handshaking, but it's still using your standard username and password that's stored locally on that pod.
Is it stored encrypted, by the way, or not? I've never even paid attention. Yeah. So.
Yeah, so it's they use standard best practices for username and password management. It's not. I'm always troubled when I go to these sites where it's like, I'll send you your password. I'm like, how
in the clear?
Do that you have a, regardless if it's in the clear or not. If you can send me my password, that's a fundamentally broken security model.
Yeah. Really.
There should be no way for you to regenerate. I understand password resets totally. That's great. But if you can tell me what my password is versus just saying whether I entered it correctly, that's a problem. But I digress. So yeah,
very good point. And people should think about that for a second. If a site can send you your password, that is a huge red flag right there. Go ahead.
Yeah. But no, it'd be, as you said, it's like any other website where the username and password are managed locally by the server, stored in the local database in a secure way. And then use session management so you don't have to log in over and over again. And they also have cross-site scripting protections and that sort of stuff as well to prevent from standard injection attacks. One of the reasons why they one of the advantages of them building on top of Ruby was Ruby has a lot of those sorts of security models built in more by default. It's harder to circumvent them versus forget to turn them on. And so they have it's a pretty secure model with respect to that sort of stuff. But you do have the problem of each pod is its own login as well. And so as you said, you're on Pluspora, I'm on Diaspora or at diaps.org. Those are two completely different username and password bases. But again, as we say, it's like email. Your email server has your usernames and passwords. Mine has mine, and that sort of stuff.
Yeah, and I'm on the other one too. So it's means that I have multiple identities on the different things. I can have different names and so on. I am really anxious to call on James Bodie because he's been absent all this time, absent without leave, I might say.
Yeah.
Absent without leave.
Just before James mentioned just another very quick couple of things.
Make it quick.
One of them can generate a question, but first of all, identity. When you log into a website, you suppose you are identified by the website, and usually what the websites do is put a cookie into your browser. There was a very, very famous website that I will not mention that had a problem with users that were randomly logged out, and they couldn't understand why. It has been looked at by a web developer, and they found out that the authentication cookie was being pushed out of the memory of the browser, because the number and the extent and the length of the tracking cookies that for the ad banners that were on this website were so big that they were shifting everything, all the memory, and pushing the cookie for the authentication of the user out of the memory space. And at the end of the day, when you refresh a page, I go to the next, the site doesn't authenticate you any longer because your cookie has fallen off the edge. So that's greed, practically. Too many ads, and that pushed out, and even stupidity of the length of the string in the cookie. That's one. But my question that is based a bit on the blockchain and identity. I understand the usage of blockchain to create a hash to secure and give an imprint to a transaction. So to secure a single transaction. But identities are not transactions. Logins are, but my identity is permanent, is not transactional. How generating a hash for my identity through the blockchain makes my identity more secure than any other hash generated with any other system? That is a permanent hash, and there will be always that hash generated by the blockchain on that site for my identity. What good use of the blockchain that is instead to certify ongoing, a chain of events and a chain of transaction add to the login and that stuff?
Would you like me to answer that?
I think so.
If you have.
Well, so there are a number of cross currents going on here, but it's not settled as to exactly how this will work. And the approaches to identity are still evolving as well. So I think that there's two things to keep in mind, Corrado. Number one is we think of identity as like, this, I'll call it meat bag here called J. And people talk about, DNA as your identity and all that stuff. But there's another thing to keep in mind is there's also identifiers. And, really, I think what we want is we want some sort of workable way to have a set of identifiers that could be tracked in the blockchain, which also entails both revoking that identity as well as the whole spectrum. For it to really work, in my opinion, it has to be from one end of the spectrum being absolute certain identity to the other end of the spectrum being absolute anonymity. That's really what I think a lot of people miss, is they start talking about identity and they go to the side of the spectrum where I absolutely know I'm talking to Corrado. And the real set of use cases goes to the other side of the spectrum where we there are many, many justifiable use cases where we need absolute anonymity. So anyway, I'm not sure that answers your question, but there are some very compelling use cases with this immutable ledger called blockchain that is causing a lot of people to look at it as a workable identity management construct. So, but I definitely get your point. Once you put information into a blockchain, it's if as long as the blockchain survives, it's there permanently, and that can be a problem.
Immutable though, because immutable is a word that's used in some of the storage that I'm buying, and companies can put stuff up there that is absolutely not changeable in any way. I don't even think you can delete it. I mean, is the blockchain really immutable? We're going to go to James, so don't get too restless. We got to get James, a report from James, because we haven't had him for a while. Jay.
Okay. Yeah. So it is immutable. I'm sorry. It's sort of like, you can think of it like, again, like a newspaper, that once that newspaper is published and once there's at least one copy of it in one library somewhere in the world, it's not going to be changed. So that's what I would say about immutable.
Okay. James, where have you been? What are you doing? And
I've been around being immutable.
Good.
As usual. Yeah, very busy bringing 4G, private 4G to lots of places. Anyway, in other news, did you see the announcement from David Duffett?
That there's no more Astrakhan?
There's no more Astrakhan, no more
yes,
global community manager called David Duffett.
Well, yeah, okay.
He's had 6.5 years, I suppose, but we'll miss him.
Yeah, I think it's important to note the different jobs that people have done. John, Todd, David, Jared. Who else?
But Jared is still going in Sangoma, isn't he?
Who?
Jared Smith.
Jared is in Sangoma now?
Yes, he is. He's back in Sangoma.
I did not know that. I thought he was in some other totally unrelated thing.
Yeah, he has some kind of management role.
So, James, where have you been? Because I haven't seen you on Wire, and since I'm not on, are you on Facebook? Are you active on Facebook? I haven't seen you in any of the channels that I'm on.
What
you need to do to be in touch?
Really, on social media, I've been working quite hard. I've been head down, getting things done, and I had a birthday as well, which was a family thing.
What are you? You're going to Commedia World in Berlin. You're going to
in
the United Kingdom.
Yeah, the other news is I've submitted my talk submission for ComCon, which I think should have a reasonably good chance of getting through because it's got a whole load of new stuff in there. I've also got a talk submission for Camellia World, and at Camellia World anyway, we're going to be doing dangerous demos.
Okay.
So ClueCon I haven't done yet.
Problematic to go to the United States in these days, right?
Well, what do you mean problematic? You mean getting there?
Yeah.
Well, not really. I mean, it's easy enough to get a Nesta, isn't it?
It's not. Yeah. Well,
yeah. The only challenge is finding an entire week in July to go and do it. Also, dear old Alan Quayle he's got an event in Chicago in October.
Yes, we mentioned it at the beginning. IIT, I think it's called, in Illinois
Institute of Technology. It's going to be TAD Summit Americas. So one of the observations from the North American contingent is that it would only be fair to have a TAD Summit over on that side of the Atlantic.
That's nice.
So there's going to be one. It's going to be in October. It's going to be in Chicago. And so when I saw that, my initial concern was that there might be a clash with Astricon, but clearly there isn't anymore.
Oh, there's no clash with Astricon. There might be a clash with ClueCon if you're going to go to Chicago twice in 1 year.
Yeah, but aren't Sangoma going to run some kind of Sangoma community event?
This is a good question.
Which is bigger than Astricon.
Yeah,
what is the source for the demise of Astricon? How do we know that?
We've heard it from several people, including Allison, David, and how many others, right?
Yeah, there was a discussion going on in one of the messenger groups.
Could just be a rebranding. Could be a SangomaCon or whatever.
It could be, yes.
Well, what have they done in the past, though? Because Sangoma is a big, they're successful.
Free PBX world.
They've been around forever. So.
Yeah,
that's interesting.
Without David Duffett to organise it and motivate it, then the danger is it becomes a TMC type commercial load of rubbish.
So in that case, they need to hire you, James.
No. I wouldn't want to do that.
Come on, James, pitch yourself.
Good.
I know I've got many other things that take my time as it is. I don't have enough time as it is. But
so, if they had the coin, they could hire me. But
that's a good point. You're over there on that side of the world too. Is Sangoma a Canadian company?
It is.
They are.
Yeah. So that's kind of different.
You're a shoe-in, Michael. You're a shoe-in.
You could be, Michael. That's right.
As I said, it would take some motivation.
Yeah, for sure.
In the form of green rectangular pieces of paper.
Yes, it's
or
not the sort of thing.
Bottles of wine would work, wouldn't they?
Yeah.
No. I still have a mortgage to pay. It would take some coin.
I guess Astricon has because the underlying environment was developers of dial plans in Asterisk.
Not 100%. No.
At the very start, the enthusiasts for the platform and so on.
Yeah, the original.
Yeah, it has changed beyond recognition and has probably lost the core.
Yeah.
It needs to reinvent something. So that's why probably a sharp cut and a restart with something else.
That's true.
Is possibly
I think
the offing.
I think that's 100%.
Certainly, given the newly significant debt load that Sangoma is carrying, it's understandable that they're going to be more commercially active and less emphasis on the open sourcey kind of bits of it.
Yes, and the whole thing is following the normal path where an organization takes over another organization and then after 6 months then ruthlessly controls costs and gets rid of every last bit of expenditure that they deem not to be essential. And that's kind of what's going on at Digim at the moment. Everything's being pruned.
Well, Sangoma also was more hardware than anything else, right?
Well, no, they
bought free BBX.
Yeah, they've got.
I haven't followed this obviously, so I didn't realize that.
Yeah, over the last 6-7 years, Sangoma have been gradually assimilating little chunks of the VoIP industry.
They are the Borg of the VoIP.
Well,
yeah.
In my remote, not looking at this every second, but for what I remember of Sangoma was that from the first days, they had better hardware than anybody else.
Especially for PSTN, yes.
Yeah, well, yeah, PSTN, right. And I remember from, God, what's the name of the German city we were in, James? You were there, I'm sure. The East German former harbor where we had the fishermen singing and stuff. What was the name of that place?
I wasn't there. You took me to Danzig.
No. I just can't remember the name of the place. But anyway, it was not Berlin. There was it even Astricon or was it the other?
It'd be a MooCon.
Yeah, it was MooCon in
Russia. A MooCon, the one thing that I never went to, but you keep on accusing me of going there.
Anyway, the point is that during that time, there was a presentation, and what they were talking about is that the IRQs, the uninterruptible, whatever that stands for, their hardware actually performed a lot better than Digium's.
Yeah, indeed. They did E1 and T1 Digium compatible cards better than Digium did.
So, that was, to me, that was their big thing. And they were able to, the big warning in Life's and Jim's book about Asterisk, where they said, don't ever put more than 2 cards in one machine. That was the thing. There was this problem of, in the old days of PCs, was the number of IRQs and the cards you had. Anyway, long story short, Sangoma was, for me, more of a hardware company. So,
yeah. Well, and they also they bought an SBC company, and then they bought a bunch of things. And what makes them unique, and since I've referred to them as Borg, I feel I have to now sort of turn that around, because it wasn't meant in the way that some Trekkies might take it. In the 7 or 8 acquisitions that they've done over the past number of years, they've been quite successful. That is, that they haven't been where some companies will, buy a competitor and then you wonder the supposed synergies weren't there, and the product line goes away, and you wonder why they went to the trouble. In their cases, the products still exist, and and are being enhanced and developed. So, as the hardware business goes away, they've been pretty good about moving to software as well.
Yeah, there's another thing to say, that Digium was not developing new cards recently. Nothing new, so it was stagnating a bit. So,
right. Well,
if we get a call of these cards because the Sangoma cards are taking over, right, it's not a big loss to the entire community and for the developers. What Sangoma did very cleverly is to create the PSTN and ISDN and T1, E1 cards on top of a networking stack.
One pipe.
One pipe.
One pipe, not daddy.
Exactly.
Who's your daddy? No daddy.
Exactly. So because,
yeah,
and they were more efficient and less resource hungry, because they had that stack, intermediate stack, that was more flexible and more software configurable, and they had more room for improvement rather than changing hardware or changing the firmware on the platform itself. On the cards, they had a better space.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say there's been very little money to be made in E1 and T1 cards over the last couple of years. And it's only if you go really big, so into the big telco bridges type cards, that there's any real interest there.
T1's
the one area that Digium made more money than anywhere else was actually in selling phones. So what was happening is people would adopt Asterisk and then buy the Digium Asterisk compatible phone just so that everything matched up. And so they were doing all right there. And I suspect Sangoma is doing all right with handsets as well now, because they have their own Sangoma branded phones.
Branded. You said correctly, branded.
Yeah,
hopefully, like many others that are coming from the same factory in.
Yeah, they're made in China.
I don't want to diss them. I am very fond of Sangoma hardware and their approach to software and on. But yeah, I have a few here demo handsets that I tested. They're good, reliable phones. Average, nothing. Well, they're all good. Good as any test phone can.
We've almost reached a stage where voice over IP phones, SIP phones, have become almost commoditized, haven't they?
Yeah, I think the last generation of SNOMs, for example, are £35 in.
Yeah, and they're made in China as well.
Yeah.
Well, they always were, but now they're owned by VUC, and they're made very efficiently.
The very first ones were actually made in the former East Germany.
Oh, yeah, but that's 15 years ago.
Well,
when
yeah.
they could exploit the workforce at lower prices than Europeans.
Heady days. Do you remember? It's the old joke about the man goes into the phone shop and asks for a schnorm fern, and the guy behind the counter says, "Would you like a smoking or non-smoking one?" Because the joke there is that they used to run quite hot.
That is not my dog.
The very first IP phone I bought was a Schnom 190 with the little rubbery buttons, and it was
yeah, have I got one?
it was pretty decent.
We're pretty much close to the last 2 minutes of the hour, so let's make sure that everything that needs to be said has been said. Oh, let's see what James is showing here.
It's a Schnom. It's a Schnom.
That's the one. That's the one.
Yeah, well, that is modern. Yeah, do you remember Schnom?
James, are you on Matrix or not? Because I see that Dan Jenkins is talking to Ule on Matrix, whatever it's called.
Matrix.
Yes, Matrix. Riot. I can't keep it.
Do you guys have a Matrix forum as well? I don't subscribe to that. I need to get on that.
Well, it's the messenger thing. There's a bridge to IRC which I've never gotten working properly because of
well, I'm on it, but I've been on it from the word go. I've never got into Aspidistra, so either you're kind of I play this game. So you're either really Matrix or Diaspora. No, locally around here is Aspidistra.
I'm having the trouble we have is that since Freenode. Freenode has had that problem with spam. They require registration, and now it's much harder to get that gateway running. Anyway, we're done. This is it. We're going to be going to the mature audiences where James can really say what he really thinks.
I can really say what I've been getting up to.
Say what you really think, although you'll be talking to ZipDX, so I'd be careful about that.
Is there anybody on ZipDX?
Who knows? Who knows? I'm sure Maxim is there. Maybe we'll see Maxim. We may see him.
It'd be great to see Maxim again in Berlin.
I just want
Maxim is not there. Dan Jenkins was there, but he's gone now.
Dan Jenkins is there, but he's on Riot/Matrix. If you've gotten this far, even if you're listening to the audio recording, join us in Berlin. I've already forgotten the dates. I think it's May 6th to 9th, maybe.
Just remind everybody which hotel you have booked.
H4. What's wrong with that? It's not the Stasi.
Well, yeah. You're right. It's not the Stasi. There are two that are available on British Airways City Breaks. Stasi is one, aka the Park Inn.
Yeah, and what else?
Then there's another one across the way which is slightly smaller, and I'm tempted to go there this year because I think it's not the H2. I don't think it's the H2. H2 is quite a way away.
No, it's a couple blocks away. We were there.
Well, it's only a couple of blocks. It's
one block,
like miles.
No, all right. We need to cut this off.
Cut. Press the button. Go. Press it.
Join us in Berlin. Join us in Berlin.
And ComCon.
May 6th to 9th. ComCon, I already forgot the dates. It's in July. I think it's 7th.
7th to 11th of July.
11th.
Probably ClueCon as well.
I won't be making that one. So no point in going to ClueCon. I won't be there.